All right, folks, I've got some bad news. It's actual bad news, not like the phony, sarcastic, ironic lead up bad news that I do to introduce a segment. If you've been following me for a while, then you're probably familiar with some of the videos that I have made where I have referred to BLM as having two-thirds of the country's support. Um, and there was a time where that was the case. Though every poll uses a different methodology, the one we're looking at today is unfortunately demonstrative of a trend that I believe is very, very worrisome. We're looking at a civic poll right here, and what we're looking at is the support, opposition, and the ambivalence towards Black Lives Matter over time. And what we can essentially see here is that if we go back to May of 2018, way back to the beginning of the chart, Black Lives Matter was more disliked than liked, but a lot of people were ambivalent on it. And with time, over here in May of 2018, those numbers crossed. More people support than not support this. And this pattern has continued. We have Breonna Taylor's murder, we have the Ahmaud Arbery video, and then we have George Floyd. And right after George Floyd, we saw an unprecedented peak in support for Black Lives Matter. And what's interesting is that peak in support for Black Lives Matter was met with essentially no change in the opposition to Black Lives Matter. About 28% of people opposed Black Lives Matter right as George Floyd was killed, and then a few days later, it was still 28%, whereas the support had jumped 8 percentage points. Since then, these trends have closed. Since George Floyd's murder, the number of people supporting Black Lives Matter has decreased, and the opposition has sharply increased. Fewer people neither support nor oppose Black Lives Matter, which means that we are now at about an 11 percentage point difference between support and opposition, which is not that far off from where we were before all of this began. 11 percentage points. So how did this happen? At its peak, we were a full 25% percentage points, or 25 percentage points up in terms of support over opposition. Now, I am not happy about this. There are certain people who are more responsible for this than others. First and foremost, we have conservative media. See, when George Floyd was murdered, there was an immediate effort on the part of conservatives to justify his murder, to delegitimize the severity of what had happened to him, and to say, he was no angel, blah, blah, blah. That Candace Owens video went viral. It's not as bad as you think. Look at what Nate Silver said on Twitter, please. Why don't you link what he said then, and I can take a look at it. If it changes my narrative, then we'll see. Um, the and though the conservatives made an immediate effort to justify what happened to George Floyd, that was largely a pre-existing and very far-right demographic of the right. I need you guys to understand, okay? The people who are online, who are watching Candace Owens or Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder are not your average conservatives. These people may have more mainstream appeal than, say, ContraPoints, but these are not your mainstream conservatives. These are very far-right people. These are people who are not just conservative because they vaguely like the idea of personal responsibility and jobs and America. These are people who are conservatives because they are part of a political engine which is designed to maximize let's be real here, how indifferent they are to the suffering of black people. Now, Nate Silver has something to say on this, and I'm going to take a look at that. There's some polling out lately that shows a decline in support for BLM following a sharp increase in June. Some people have taken that to mean that Trump/Republican messaging on BLM is breaking through. Plausible, but I'm not so sure that's so straightforward. Okay? That is the first thing that I was going to say, that conservative media is catching up, that more and more people are being red-pilled on the riots and how all the suburbs are burning and blah, blah, blah. And what's more, that the Democratic Party has not done nearly enough to address this narrative. And this is the whoa, guys, scrolling down will lead to more information in a Twitter thread that ends with, I'm not sure it's that straightforward. You really think a Nate Silver tweet would end with him saying it's not that straightforward and then he would just leave it at that? You know, I can see right underneath it, there's a comment tweet directly underneath it that with more images. Okay, so what I was going to say, and we'll see how much Nate Silver's bit contradicts or supports my theory, is that the Democratic Party and Joe Biden have done a terrible job of addressing this culture war bullshit. The messaging for Trump and for the Republicans is very, very easy. Our cities are burning. Lawlessness is running in the streets. Democrats are criminalizing the police rather than criminalizing the rioters. Everything is going upside down. You need to get guns. You need to defend your property. Kyle, whatever the fuck his name was a hero. He was attacked by rioters. He was defending his property. All of this stuff. It's a very easy line. Very strong culture war perspective on their part. Very easy to defend. Rittenhouse. Yeah, thank you. Whereas the Democrats are kind of in a bind here because the Democrats can't take as hard line of a position because unfortunately being right requires more nuance. And not to say that Democrats are often right, but in this case, they're at least closer to being correct than the Republicans. So with regards to the Democrats, what can they do? Well, the Democrats can't become pro-rioting and looter, obviously. That probably wouldn't be a good rhetorical or optical strategy to just go like, yeah, we burn those buildings. That would be that power level is just, it's too high for them. Okay, their body can't handle it. All right, it would be like One for All inside of Deku. You know, in the hit children's cartoon show Boku no Hero Schoolhouse. Is essentially supporting the rioters is One for All. It's an overwhelming, quirk of power inhabiting the body of the weak, fragile Democrats, and the most they can do is do their finger flick, which breaks their fingers. If you've seen the thing, you know the thing. You get the joke. Now, so they can't do that. It's too powerful. But at the same time, what exactly is the message of the Democrats? Like, what if they said, like, actually think about it for a second. What if they said, well, Biden has said he doesn't support the anarchists and the looters. Okay. So what position is he taking? If people are concerned about civil unrest, what out are the Democrats offering them? Have the Democrats taken a strong stance on mediating the conflict between the protesters and the police? Well, not fucking really. The Democrats have talked about police reform, but they haven't really drawn the essential conclusion here, which is that addressing police brutality and reform will end the protests. The easy line here, it's so easy. All the protests we're seeing right now are under Trump. All the protests, all the looting, all the fires, everything that's happening right now is happening because the people of this country are deeply unhappy with their treatment by the government. And I, Joe Biden, whatever, will address that by mediating this conflict. We will resolve these issues. We will arrest the looters and the rioters, but most of these people are good, honest protesters, and we will put an end to the fighting in our streets, blah, 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 blah. He has to offer people an out. And it's not just about saying this once and having this be on your website. You have to repeat this over and over and over and over and over again. The way the Republicans are. The Republicans didn't just say once, these rioters are because of Democrats. They repeat it over and over and over and over and over and over again. Non-fucking stop. The Republicans don't shut the fuck up. Have you watched the RNC? The entire fucking Republican National Convention was just them going over and over and over. The law of this country is being destroyed. Order is being destroyed. They want to destroy America. They're burning down our country. They're burning down our suburbs. You need to defend yourself. We're going to defend you. We're going to support the police. The police aren't criminals. The criminals are. Non-stop. They turn into NPCs. Well, unfortunately, that's what the people need right now. The people need NPC dialogue trees being crammed down their throat and ears like tentacles in a hentai. That's what the people need. And Biden's not cramming anything down my throat right now. Biden's not cramming anything down my ears right now. He's not. The Democrats aren't jumping on this narrative. They're letting this narrative get hijacked entirely by the Republicans. And what that means is, and let's be perfectly clear here, guys, what that means is that over time, people who are anxious about the state of this country because of the riots and because of the civil unrest will move right because they aren't being given an out by the Democratic Party. That is a serious issue. The Democrats, it's like they want to lose. They're not jumping on this. But let's see what Nate Silver has to say about this. And by the way, Biden can't win by going harder on the protesters. Anyone who's looking for law and order is going to go to Trump. Anybody who thinks law and order when they're asked what their priorities are for this country is going to vote Republican no matter what you do. So Biden can't flank them from the right. He's not going to win that way. He needs to offer a different solution. Biden has said he wants police reform. Yeah, but that's not the same as pushing a narrative. Biden said he wants police reform, yeah, but he's not on the news 24/7 talking about how all of these protests and riots are because of incompetent government and he needs to mediate the dispute. He's not doing that. Let's finish. Let's see. Nate, hit me up. An alternative inference, is that BLM popularity is waning because Trump is saying less about it. His Twitter feed has made fewer references to BLM/Black Lives Matter over the past 6 to 8 weeks, and he's also used terms like rioting and looting much less often than in June. I don't know how convincing of a hypothesis I find this, but we'll see. In other words, some of the popularity boost in BLM in June may have reflected a reaction against Trump/negative partisanship. Voters give Trump terrible marks for his handling of race relations, and people may flock to the opposite position of whatever he says on these issues. This is relevant too. In Wisconsin, while there's been a big decline in support for BLM, evaluations of Trump's handling of the protests is just as bad as before. That's not to say there are no risks here for Democrats. Maybe there is some degree of quiet backlash building to the protests. But if Trump tries to loudly exploit that, it could backfire. I'm not entirely sure if I agree with Nate Silver's interpretation of this at all. I really don't think national polls on support for BLM are that dependent on Trump's Twitter term usage. I think a way easier narrative here is just that the Republican base has gotten better and better and better at weaponizing this narrative, and the Democrats just haven't captured it at all. But I mean, Nate's the pollster. I think it might be copium. I think it might be a little bit of copium. I think Nate Silver might have twisted the little valve to admit some copium gas into the accordion tube that leads to the mouth piece, and he is now inhaling copium just a little bit because I don't think that's very likely. When was the last time people opposed BLM this fervently? We're at 38% opposition now. The last time we had this much opposition to BLM, it was back in August of 2018. Jesus Christ. Support is higher than it was before, but this is mostly at the expense of people who are neither sure nor oppose. If we take a look at the overall change since George Floyd's killing, which is when all this really kicked off, oppose went from 28% now to 38%, a 10 percentage point increase. Whereas with the support, it went from 46% to 49%. So since the BLM protests began, there's been a 10 percentage point increase in opposition and a 3 percentage point increase in support. That is not a win for us at all. Anyway, the Democrats, Joe Biden, are really dropping the ball on delivering this narrative. They're really dropping a ball on giving people an out on this issue. Like to a pretty disgusting degree. Democrats, listen, it's like what Lenin said about the Labor Party, ye back in 110 years ago, okay? These fuckers want to lose, all right? They do. The Democrats, this has been a joke for ages. Incompetent. They hate themselves. They don't want to govern. They don't know how to govern. Republicans know how to govern. Republicans are incredibly effective at governing in the very selective way in which they are interested in governing, which is to make the uber wealthy people in this country wealthier, and then that is it, and that is the only thing. That is the only. It ends there. And he does. They do that. Democrats do that too. Actually, they're both pretty good at that. Maybe that's just the easy part of governing. I gotta say, if I was president or if I was king government, lowering taxes, making stuff easier for businesses, that's easy. That's the easy part of being a leader. Everything's stacked in their favor already. Making life harder for the common folk, that I think is significantly more difficult.